Jake turned off the highway onto a narrow dirt road, and there it was, still water. A tiny village lost on the shore of a vast, reed-covered lake called Black Hollow. He had been coming here for years, ever since he first heard about the lake from an old contractor at work. Strangely enough, not from his father, who was actually from these parts. Every summer, without fail, he made this trip. He even switched his city sedan for an old SUV just to handle the awful roads. Deep ruts, potholes like mortar craters. Stillwater was little more than a handful of houses, most of them long abandoned. The ones still occupied housed a few elderly residents living out their last years in solitude. Jake always stayed with old Hank, a retired widower of indeterminate age. His house was the closest to the lake, and he had a boat, though this time Jake had brought his own, an inflatable one. He couldn't keep borrowing from the old man forever. He wasn't some broke kid. Jake parked at the gate and started unloading his gear, knowing Hank would hear him and come out. Sure enough, the door creaked open. "Well, I'll be damned. Jake's back," Hank smirked, stepping onto the porch in his usual camouflage pants and plaid flannel. "How's it going, son?" Hank liked company, though he wasn't big on hospitality. Still, Jake had his first taste of wild boar thanks to him. The old man hunted too. In a way, Jake envied him. No job, no city stress, just a simple life like in the old days. And he did just fine for himself. He had everything a man needed, except a wife. Hank had been widowed long ago. "Doing good," Jake replied, shaking his hand. Hank sighed, shaking his head. "Yeah, shouldn't have come today, son." Jake frowned. "What? Why not?" He glanced at the sky. The weather was perfect. Cloudy, but no sign of rain. He had checked the forecast carefully. "Bad day for fishing," Hank muttered, staring at the ground. "You'd be better off waiting till tomorrow. Or next week." "Are you serious? I just drove 100 miles, Hank. I'm fishing today. I head back tomorrow. Work Monday. What's with the bad vibes?" Hank didn't smile. "I'm telling you like it is, boy. Today's no good. No one goes near the lake today. That's just how it is." Jake chuckled, shaking his head. "What is this, Friday the 13th or something?" "Ain't about the date," Hank said darkly. "It's the day itself. It ain't safe. Not till sunrise." Jake pulled his boat from the trunk. Even folded, it was heavy as hell, but it was a two-seater with paddles, everything he needed. "I don't buy into superstition." "Well, I ain't going out there with you," Hank said firmly. "And I wouldn't if I were you." Jake glanced at him. They always fished together. "What's gotten into you, old man?" "Just don't do it. You afraid a catfish will eat me?" "People disappear, Jake," Hank muttered. "On this day, always, my granddaddy told me. His granddaddy told him. Always been that way. People go out, bodies don't come back." Jake rolled his eyes. "And yet here you are. So you survived because you never fished on this one day?" Hank clenched his jaw. "Do what you want. Maybe you'll be the first to return." That night, after half a bottle of whiskey, Hank still wouldn't budge. "Listen, man," Jake slurred slightly. "What's gonna happen if I go out? Tsunami? Sea monster? Bigfoot?" Hank didn't smile, just shook his head. "If you hear a splash," he said quietly, "paddle back to shore. Fast as you can." Jake woke to his alarm. His head was heavy, the whiskey sitting poorly. Hank lay still, maybe asleep, maybe pretending. Fine. If he wouldn't go, Jake would go alone. He stepped outside into the night. The darkness was absolute, black as tar. He paused, feeling a strange unease. His boat lay where he had left it. Jake took a step, then heard a rustling sound. He turned sharply, shining his phone's flashlight, and his heart skipped a beat. A woman stood on the shore, barefoot, disheveled, her hollow eyes fixed on him. "What the hell?" She didn't move, just stared. Then slowly she dropped onto all fours and began lapping at the water. A chill ran down Jake's spine. Ma'am? You should head inside." She didn't answer, just straightened, licked her lips, and slowly raised a hand, pointing at the lake. Jake swallowed hard. Every instinct told him to turn around and walk away. But what would he tell Hank? Shaking his head, he pushed the boat into the water, climbed in, and grabbed the paddles. Suddenly, a splash. Loud, close. The boat rocked. Jake froze. Another splash. Bigger, closer. Something was circling beneath the surface. And then, a shadow rose from the depths. The water churned violently as something massive broke through the surface. Slimy, elongated fingers clamped around the edge of the boat, dripping with lakeweed. The smell of rot filled the air. Jake screamed, struggling against the force pulling him down. The boat tipped dangerously to one side. Then he saw the woman on the shore. She was laughing. Her mouth stretched impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged, inhuman teeth. The thing in the water yanked. Jake's grip on the boat slipped, and suddenly he was underwater. Darkness swallowed him whole. His lungs burned. Shadows swirled around him, shapes barely discernible in the murky depths. Hands, dozens of them, grasped at his limbs, dragging him deeper. The last thing he saw before the water consumed him was the woman's face, peering down through the rippling surface, still smiling. By morning, the lake was still. The boat floated empty. Hank sat on his porch smoking, watching the water. He knew no one would come looking for Jake. They never did. The woman watched from the trees, waiting for the next visitor, and the lake was hungry again.